New style, down, do your dance, do your We got a brand new dance. Down, do your dance, do your dance. Swing on, baby. Do your dance. Down, down, do your dance, do your dance. They say I'm a rapper.
Hello, welcome to Chapter 32, The Age of Globalization, and the last chapter in the Brinkley textbook. Here are your highlights. Again, essentially we're going to take us through Clinton, George W. Bush, and then just into Obama, and that will be the end. Okay, starting with the resurgence of partisanship. So if you remember, Clinton won with less than a majority of the votes. Here he is into the Clinton presidency. One of his biggest accomplishments is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Again, the NAFTA eliminates trade barriers, tariffs between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So divisive during the election. Again, Ross Perot was against it. Clinton was maybe for it. George H.W. Bush was definitely for it. Clinton wins, and it is so divided in the Senate that Al Gore, the vice president, has to cast a tie-breaking vote. Okay. One of the other attempted accomplishments during, so it's not an actual accomplishment. One of the other things during the Clinton presidency, he tried to institute healthcare reform. Unfortunately for Clinton, it was top down. So the healthcare committee was led by Hillary Clinton. It was done in secret, and really what doomed the healthcare reform was a series of ads. Called Harry Louise ads, and that they were essentially this couple sitting around the kitchen table talking about the healthcare changes and would they be able to keep their doctor, and they've known this doctor all their life, and everything. It made people really nervous. So the healthcare reform failed, and actually it's some of the lessons from that healthcare debacle was learned by President Obama that later led to Obamacare. Sorry, I forgot to turn on the face cam. Okay, so the Republican resurgence. So 1994, the midterm elections, the Republicans led by Newt Gingrich, the guy in the middle of the picture over there, promises contract with America. And the contract with America promises to rein in U.S. spending, American government spending, to balance the budget, and it's successful. He captures Congress with his contract with America, and what that forces Clinton to do is kind of move his agenda to the middle. Clinton is actually what they call a third-way Democrat. He's the one that actually pioneers that. And a third-way Democrat is a Democrat that doesn't necessarily subscribe to the beliefs of the Great Society, New Deal, where big government programs can solve everything, but also don't agree with the conservatives. Okay, and so he's looking for a third way. And so what does the third way look like? Clinton actually cuts taxes. He actually balances the budget. He changes one of his big accomplishments. He changes welfare, and he changes welfare to what he calls workfare, and so that you have to volunteer, you have to show that you're actively looking for a job to get welfare. So he has a lot of catchy slogans like that. Again, welfare to workfare. Affirmative action. Clinton is mend it, don't end it. With gays in the military at this time, which were banned, he said, "Don't ask, don't tell," so that way they could still serve. And the Republicans actually tried government shutdowns. This is one of the first of probably many future shutdowns. And the Republicans take the blame for that. Okay, Clinton is a masterful politician, if nothing else. The Republicans take the blame for that. Then we move into the 1996 election, Clinton versus Dole, and the economy is doing very well. And this is really what gets Clinton reelected. Again, it's the economy stupid, that if the economy is doing well, incumbents will tend to get reelected. If the economy is not doing so well, they tend to get thrown out of office. Okay, so Clinton triumphant and embattled. And what happens with Clinton's kind of third wave policies is that he has a series of budget surpluses. This is the first time we've had a budget surplus in 30 years. And of course, just like the political cartoon there to the right, once you have a budget surplus, now the race is on to try to decide what should we do with that money, and that'll come up in the next election. Okay, Clinton's downfall, though, is his affair with Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky is a White House intern, young woman that hits on Bill Clinton, and because Bill Clinton's kind of a womanizer, he gets in an affair with her. They start investigation with Whitewater, the Whitewater real estate development in Arkansas. That reaches up into Clinton's womanizing, reaches all the way into the White House. He gets put on asked to answer questions before the special prosecutor, and under oath, he lies under oath saying he never had sexual relations with that woman. And so, because he lied, he is brought up on impeachment that he perjured himself and he obstructed justice. But again, impeachment has two meanings. And so he was impeached, he was brought up on charges, but really there was no chance that the Senate was going to convict him. So, kind of like the Andrew Johnson charge, they didn't want impeachment to be based off of like political disputes, that they wanted impeachment to be based off high crimes and misdemeanors. Clinton is impeached, but he is acquitted. And not only that, after that, he became more popular with the American public. Okay, last thing, foreign policy wise, in terms of Bill Clinton, he has Kosovo. Kosovo is actually, so there is the old Yugoslavia. Slobodan Milosevic is sending troops into Kosovo. They are trying to ethnically cleanse, which is a nice way of saying commit genocide of the Muslims in Kosovo. NATO, led by the United States, leads a week-long bombing campaign. And the NATO bombing leads Milosevic to call a truce, and United Nations peacekeeping troops go into Kosovo, and they sign this peace accord, actually in Dayton, Ohio. Okay, so it brings us up to the election of 2000. George W. Bush, son of H.W. Bush, versus Al Gore, the vice president. And so what happens is Al Gore kind of distanced himself from Bill Clinton because of his whole all of his scandals and affairs. It comes down to Florida. So Florida, if you remember, just like in the 1876 election, Florida is one of the disputed areas. The problem with Florida is that there is a recount. Okay, I'm sorry, let me back this up for a sec. Al Gore actually wins the popular vote. He wins it by 540,000. Okay, one of 3 times where the winner of the popular vote will not win the election. So anyway, we go to Florida, and if you look at the picture at the right, in Florida they have this weird ballot. It's called the butterfly ballot, where the names are on one side, the punch holes are on the other, and because it is so close, they actually have to do a recount. And it sounds simple, but there's a lot of debate as to what counts as a vote or not. So it's more, I think, interesting, maybe fun at this point. So the hanging door Chad up here, would you count that as a vote? A swinging door Chad here, would you count that as a vote? A tried Chad where one corner is lifted, a dimpled Chad where there's an indentation there but not pushed through. So remember, there's a lot of elderly people in Florida. Maybe they meant to vote, just couldn't push through the paper. A pregnant Chad where, again, it looked like someone kind of pushed through but didn't. Anyways, the case goes. So one of the things about the election in November is that they have to actually vote, quote unquote, in the Electoral College in the first week of December, and that date is approaching, and it goes up to the Supreme Court. The Republicans sue, saying that they should just certify the results they have. Democrats want to delay the Electoral College vote so they could actually find out who is the winner. And the Supreme Court decides 5-4 along political lines. So 5 conservative justices vote to stop the counting. 4 liberal judges say they should still count, and George Bush is crowned. Sorry, that's Freudian slip. George Bush is named the winner and therefore president. Okay, so the second Bush presidency. This is George W. Bush again, and going back to that budget surplus. Here's how far we were. They said that in 2000, if we had took all the surplus, the leftover money we had each year, and used it to pay off the debt, we could pay off the debt in, I believe it was 10 years. But of course, they don't do that. So George Bush runs on the idea that that budget surplus is tax. We should give it back to the people through tax cuts. He said it's kind of like overpaying at the store. If you overpay at the store doesn't get to keep the money. You should get your money back. Al Gore had this funky idea that we should use it and save the money to pay for Social Security. And Saturday Night Live made a joke of him saying like he's going to put it in this lockbox where nobody can touch it, and that money would be used to preserve Social Security. So of course, elections matter. President Bush, or George W. Bush, wins the presidency, and there is the largest tax cut in American history. The election in 2004. This is obviously after 9/11. So George Bush is still pretty popular. But one of the issues that come up during the election in 2004 is there is a proposed amendment to ban gay marriage. And so this becomes one of the hot button issues of the day, cultural hot button issues. That brings people out to the polls, and George W. Bush wins re-election. Okay, the economic boom. So from the economy, what we have is a bunch of new business practices, in particular the mergers, which create economies of scale. And so economies of scale is just if you do a lot of one thing, then it's going to be cheaper because you're doing it over and over again, and you will get discounts just through the sheer volume of it. Okay, just as evidence how much the economy grew, the Dow Jones in 1980 was indexed at 1,000. In 2017, it was indexed at 21,000. So that means if you had $1,000 in 1980, it would now be $21,000 in 2017. That's a pretty good return. In terms of technology and technological industries, and so one of the things they do is they create digital economies and digitizing services. They actually create fewer jobs. And so that's one thing most people don't think about. They love technology. They love self-scan at the grocery store. They love the ATMs. They love Venmo. All that stuff does is take jobs away from actual people. Okay. Going back to one more thing, the new business practices. Again, one of the things that businesses do to control wages is that they work to break unions. Again, create right to work states, as well as outsourcing. So again, if you can have some guy overseas do your job for $1 an hour versus the $15 or $20 an hour that you're getting paid, it's going to be a lot cheaper, a lot more profitable for those businesses. Okay, so continuing on with the economy, we have a two-tiered economy, and so just kind of the backdrop to this. So in the 50s and 60s, during that economic boom, we didn't have really any competition. So Western Europe, Japan was destroyed, but by the 1970s, they are rebuilt for sure, and both Western Europe and Japan, and so we have foreign competition and we have trade imbalance. And one of the other things, kind of like if you remember the steamboat and if you remember the canal back in the 1800s, railroads later in the late 1800s, the modern transportation development are these cargo ships. Okay, and so these cargo ships can load up. One of the problems of moving, if anyone that's moved, is like how do you pack your stuff in the U-Haul truck, right? You have this like playing Tetris. You flip the couch upside down, you put this in there. With container ships like here, what you do is you just shove everything in the container, and they stack up nicely because they're of uniform size. You pull up to the port right here, and then you don't. This used to be done by people. Now it's done by a computer. You have the giant magnet that picks up the boxes and puts it either in a railroad car or on a truck bed, and they're off. And so that has allowed for globalization, which has created that two-tiered economy. So if you remember from the diagrams throughout the semester, from 1948 to 1973, the growing economy lifted all boats. Okay, and everybody prospered. But from 1973 to the present, really the top 20% benefit. And there's a growing sense of poverty during this time since 1973, growing inequality. So the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. The picture in the middle, just kind of a fun story about container ships. There was a cargo ship container that had rubber duckies in it, and the ship capsized in a storm, and the rubber duckies were let loose in the ocean. And one of the fun things about this story is that they were able to detect current patterns, ocean current patterns, because of the flow of the rubber duckies. Okay, so we get the digital revolution, the development of the personal PC. So 1977, Apple IIe comes out with their first personal computer. From there, quickly, we go to the internet and ARPA. ARPA is kind of like the early stages of the internet. It is originally designed so government researchers, research labs and universities can communicate with each other. And then we grow from ARPA to the World Wide Web and faster internet, and now Snapchat. Okay, and if you snap that, you will find out what it's actually about. Okay, breakthrough in genetics. So we dedicate $3 billion to map the human genome. Okay, and by 2013, we have mapped over 100,000 genes, which obviously is a breakthrough science. And for any of you STEM kids or kids that are interested in biology, you know that where we're at in terms of the human genome is I think the CRISPR. I don't know if it's called the CRISPR project or CRISPR, where you can actually snip out genes like this little thing right here, snip out genes and replace it with other genes. So if potentially, I think if you want your offspring to have blue eyes instead of brown eyes, that you could snip that out and replace that. If you want if you have a dangerous disease that's hereditary in your family, that runs through your family, you could potentially snip that out. But the morality and ethics of that obviously is up for debate. Okay, shifting population. And so what's happening with this country is the baby boomers are beginning to age, okay, and they're becoming seniors. There's a slower growth of the native born, okay, and so native born Americans have a lower birth rate. There is 36 million immigrants that come over this time period, and it's over 12% of the population. Again, this is the primary areas from Latin America to Asia, or Latin America and Asia. The predicted change in this society in America is in 2042, whites will no longer be the majority. They will be the largest group, but they will no longer be the majority. And that's part of that shifting population, shifting demographics. And for you 6th hour folks, this is what we talk about, a changing American identity. So what is the identity of America? If you ask yourself that question, how is it changing, and is that a good or a bad thing? Okay, better sense through this graph, total immigration from 1960 to 2010. You can see the exponential increase in immigration. Okay, that leads to it during 5-year periods. Forgive me, I'm sick. Another graph, again, over 53% of immigrants from 1995 to 2010 come from Latin America, 25% from Asia, and that leaves the other 22% from Europe and elsewhere. Okay, African American in the post-civil rights area, and this is really where it's a tale of two cities. So for some African Americans, half of all African Americans have graduated from high school and gone on to college. 50% had white collar jobs, and so that is really kind of typified by the Cosbys. So you look here at the Cosbys. Bill Cosby's a doctor. They got this middle class family. They live out in the suburbs, and really that the good part here is that African Americans have made it. There's Motown songs from the 1950s and 60s. Things are going well. However, for African Americans that are trapped in the inner city, the underclass, a third of those people live in urban decay. Okay, less than half the students in inner cities graduate. And so it really is a tale of two cities when we say, hey, African Americans, what's their status? It depends. Are you looking out here at people like the Cosby family? Okay, they're not real again. Or are you looking towards the inner city? So it gives you comparison of black and white something. Okay, continuing on with the changing society, we talk about the modern plagues, drugs, and AIDS. The drug is really, we're talking about the crack epidemic. Sorry about that. Crack epidemic primarily happens in inner cities, and what that is, it's crack is mixed with other chemicals, kind of boiled down and made into these rocks, and they're sold for cheap on the street. So it's a cheap high, very powerful high, but it dissipates quickly, and it's highly addictive, and so it's primarily inner city folks getting addicted to crack. And so in crack, if any of you guys pay attention to the political discourse, it is epitomizes the disparity in drug sentencing, okay, in the criminal justice system. So because it was primarily seen as an inner city problem, crack users and sellers both got harsh sentences, whereas powdered cocaine use, which is still cocaine but more expensive in its pure form, those individuals tended not to get those individuals tended not to get as long of sentences, and people said primarily because it was one group versus another. If you want to know what the crack epidemic, sorry, I'm kind of sick here, was like, the modern day parallel to that is probably the opioid crisis. Except for the opioid crisis tends to hit white rural populations harder, not so much inner city. Okay, the second thing there is AIDS. And so the AIDS epidemic, it was first seen as a gay disease, and so primarily afflicted gays because they tended to have, I think, more unprotected sex, and because they were closeted, many of them. And it wasn't really until Magic Johnson and Mary Fisher, this famous, I think she's just a socialite, announced that they had AIDS, because it was, I'm sorry, it was gays and drug users. And they both had, Mary Fisher had contracted it through her husband, and Magic Johnson, I think it was through probably unprotected sex. That there's a lot of sympathy then garnered for the AIDS epidemic, and it was no longer seen just as a gay disease, but one that afflicted all humans. Nowadays, I think AIDS can be brought under control through a combination or cocktail drugs, or a combination of drugs. They call them a cocktail of drugs. Okay, so the battle over feminism and abortion, it really is the abortion fight. On the one side, we have, you guys are living through this right now, the right to life movement, where they want to ban, I think if they had their ways, they would ban all abortions. Um, any type of abortion would be illegal. Pro-choice movement wants to keep abortion legal, maintain Roe versus Wade where it's legal in the first trimester. The really divide is here in the middle, though. You can't see my pen. The divide is here in the middle because now before, if they can't keep it entirely legal, they can't ban it entirely. It's like, what kind of restrictions can they put in place? So restrictions such as mandatory waiting periods, mandatory counseling, spousal consent, parental notification, those kind of things. I think the latest battleground of the air is still going on, and with the Supreme Court, I think having a majority of conservative justices now, many pro-lifers hope that abortion will be banned. Where it's not, I think Ohio has tried to pass a bill that said abortion will be illegal once a fetal heartbeat is detected. Okay, so that's kind of the where we're at now with that. When it comes to the growth of fundamentalism, okay, that's a faux pas. The growth of environmentalism, we signed we negotiate the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol would limit carbon emissions, but the U.S. rejects. Okay, and the primary argument, I think, with all these environmental pacts is that it would hurt the economy. Okay, that American presidents have been unwilling to sign on to climate change bills, essentially, because it would hurt the economy and throw Americans out of work. So we feel bad about the economy, but not bad enough where we will want to make some people unemployed. Okay, so intervention, and what we have again is, because it's a unipolar world with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it's really just the United States, and you have a lot of critics, okay, critics of this new world order. And so some of these people here on the right, they are protesting globalization, and so um, the protests attract a lot of, it's a mixture of folks. And so from the left, again, radicals, they protest the World Trade Organization that has made the world freer for trade, but also it means a lot of people lose jobs in America. They oppose corporate takeover. They oppose the environmental concerns, the economic threat posed by multinational companies. And so there's a series of meetings around the world that attract a large-scale protests here. Okay, and so that is kind of the first sign that maybe not everything's going to be smooth sailing. On the other side, you have the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, and again, I would say it's another reaction to fundamentalism. And so the guy on the left is Saeed Qutb. He is a dissident, a fundamentalist in Egypt, criticized the government, saying it's too Western. He gets jailed, he gets killed. His ideas kind of become the foundation for Islamic fundamentalism. Okay, Islamic fundamentalism is this idea that I think Western influence is destructive and they need to get the West out. of Islamic areas. Of course, that gives rise to terrorism then. Well, not of course, but if you remember, terrorism became a weapon of use during Ronald Reagan's time with the Beirut Beirut barracks bombing. Say that 3 times fast. And so the origins of terrorism, yeah, it started in the purpose of terrorism, and they're trying to instill fear in people or government, and that's if by blowing something up they can cause widespread panic, then they've really won there. So there's a lot of incidents against the U.S., not just from the Middle East, but also there's domestic terrorists. So Timothy McVeigh, the guy that blew up the Oklahoma City Federal Building, the Unabomber, and then of course we have the World Trade bombing, and that was actually done by foreign terrorists. So what that gives us is this war on terrorism, and the war on terrorism is actually coined during President George W. Bush's let's try that again. President George W. Bush's presidency. And the war on terror kind of leads you to believe like, like, hey, we're actually fighting something. But the problem with the war on terror is that terror is like an idea. And so how do you really know you've won an idea against an idea? And so one of the funny things, not really funny, the Republicans criticized Bill Clinton for not having the courage, the strength to send troops in after terrorists, in particular Osama bin Laden. So there was a couple earlier attacks, one on an embassy in Kenya, one on the USS Cole off the shore of Yemen. And many conservatives thought that we should have sent troops after Osama bin Laden. In fact, one time we launched missile strikes at his training base, but they had just left a few hours before that. So what happens with 9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers there, you get Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda is this terrorist group led by Osama bin Laden. They're being housed in Afghanistan, protected by the Taliban government. And so they are unwilling to turn over Osama bin Laden. And so we invade Afghanistan after 9/11 and, topple the government, although we don't find Osama bin Laden at that point. So we go from Afghanistan, where we have relatively quick success in toppling the government, to focusing on Iraq. And so what happens is there's a lot of neocons in the George W. Bush's administration. And so they, if you remember, they were the group that was for Western values, kind of defend America. And it starts showing up in President Bush's speeches that he calls Iraq part of the axis of evil stretching across the globe from Iraq to Iran to North Korea. And they start making their case that Iraq is trying to acquire nuclear weapons. Okay, and the Bush Doctrine, which I don't think actually gets mentioned, Brinkley, but the Bush Doctrine is this belief that if it's also known as the 1% doctrine. So if there's a 1% chance that you get attacked, you have the right as a nation to act. Okay, and so his administration was going around on the on the Sunday news talk shows in the morning and saying the evidence, unfortunately, might be in the form of a mushroom cloud. That if we wait after they've acquired a nuclear weapon, there's going to be thousands of Americans that are killed. And so we get into the Iraq War, and then that becomes a quagmire, kind of like Vietnam, in that we topple Saddam Hussein. We try to establish a government there, but unfortunately, in Iraq, there are two dominant groups, the Sunni and the Shia. And so the Shia are the majority group, but they've been kind of repressed all these years by Saddam Hussein, who is a Sunni. And so now that the tables have been flipped, there's a lot of sectarian fighting between the two groups, and the U.S. is kind of caught in the middle there, and we have a hard time maintaining control in Iraq. So the Bush presidency begins to unravel with Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina is the one that destroys New Orleans, and so the people are told when the hurricane, I don't know if you guys know, New Orleans is below sea level, so as Hurricane Katrina approaches, they tell folks to go to the Superdome, Louisiana Superdome. And so people go to the Superdome. There's no plans in there for like caring for thousands of people, so there's no real food or water. Bathrooms get clogged up pretty quickly. And what happens, it's not really President Bush's fault, but it gets sold as this, is that he's come back from Texas. His ranch is in Texas, and I think he has to take a detour and fly over New Orleans to kind of check it out from the air. And it's just a bad look because here George Bush is flying over the Superdome in New Orleans, and that's where Kanye West makes his infamous declaration that George Bush hates black people or something to that degree. And so there's a lot. I mean, it's uh, a troubled recovery to New Orleans, and which doesn't help George W. Bush. What finally does in Bush's presidency, though, is the financial crisis. So there's a financial collapse in 2008. The banks go bust. It's predicated on housing, and housing always go up, and then it's like a house of cards, and once it starts falling, it starts tumbling fast. And so there's some serious concerns that like capitalism in America is going to fail. And so as we approach the 2008 election, you have Barack Obama running for the Democrats, John McCain running for the Republicans. And John McCain really doesn't understand economic policy. Obama really doesn't, but he does get tutored by some Wall Street folks, so he knows what he's talking about. That becomes part of the difference, and frankly, I think it's probably more because of the dislike for George W. Bush. Like probably any Democrat could have run and won at that time. Barack Obama is elected in 2008. So the Obama presidency, what saves us probably from collapse, total collapse, economic collapse, is the stimulus package. So Obama, I believe, wanted originally $1.2 trillion to create jobs, essentially like the New Deal. He gets 800 million, and that stimulus package that he gets from Congress is probably sufficient, is enough to kind of turn the economy around. The Tea Party is a splinter group for the Republicans, and so the Tea Party, they really dislike Obama, probably hate Obama, dislike government intervention, and they're one of the things they stand for is a balanced budget. And so there's some people that thought during the economic decline we should actually run a balanced budget, and actually that's what some countries in Europe do, because again, like that old thinking that if you don't have money, you shouldn't be spending money. And so the Tea Party, which is still kind of around today, they don't call themselves the Tea Party, but it's the one of the dominant. Well, let's try that again. They're an influential wing of the Republican Party. Okay, so international relations. Obama does establish relations with Cuba again for the first time since the Communist Revolution, and then Obama. Let's see, it's not actually in here. So Obama's biggest accomplishment is Obamacare. And so one of the things, because when Obama was elected president, they elected a Democratic Congress. So you had Democratic presidency, Democratic Congress, and they really only probably had a chance to work on one thing before like things might change. And so they had a debate: should we work on immigration? Should we work on the national debt? Should we work on health care? And because we're coming off that 2008 crisis, his chief of staff had one of the more famous things, like never let a crisis go to waste. And so we could have worked on anything at that point. He chose Obamacare, okay, which we originally used as a derisive term, but he embraced it. Some of the failures under Obama, the NSA controversy. So this is the whole Edward Snowden. They find out that the National Security Agency is spying on gathering our data, okay, and snooping in our stuff, and so that's clearly unconstitutional. That's certainly a ding of the Obama presidency, and there's political gridlock, and so during his presidency and really probably continued on through today, it is really tough for anyone to get anything done. And so just like the Republicans, they had a brief window where Donald Trump was elected. They controlled the Senate and the House. They passed through tax cuts. But now with the midterm election, because Democrats have been elected, it's hard for them to actually get anything done. So that's it. Give yourself a high five for finishing chapter 32. A shout out to those 9 students. I think it's typically about 9 students that watch the video right away after I post it. Good for you. Don't forget to subscribe because we'll probably do the reviews on here as well. And also don't forget to buy the merch. Have a great night, everyone.